We give a way too early 2024 Baltimore Ravens record prediction, game-by-game breakdowns, and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms and includes in video form on YouTube and audio form wherever you get your show. So be sure to subscribe, follow along. You're not missing out on any content, whether you're in video form or in audio form. 5 days a week Ravens content either which way. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We are back. It is Taco Thursday, and we now know the Baltimore Ravens full 2024 schedule. The NFL makes a big deal out of it nowadays. Even just a couple years ago, really, right? Didn't really seem like it was that big of a thing. It's like, all right, they'll play here, they'll play there. Here's when they'll play. We knew the Ravens' opponents a couple months ago, obviously, with the way that divisions and everything and where the Ravens finished. We knew that. But now we know when they play. And there are some interesting tidbits throughout Baltimore's schedule. Now, we went live last night right around 9 p.m., talked about instant reactions to the schedule. So if you want my instant reaction, be sure to check out that live stream or just go back in audio form as well as video form and audio form. So those live shows obviously will be on YouTube, but you can still listen to them even if you don't catch them live. We're going to talk about the analysis in general, though, just talking about where the Ravens are going and how everything will work, travel schedules, prime time. So we'll get into more of a general analysis in the first part of the show. Then we'll get into more pros and cons of the Ravens schedule here, and then game-by-game predictions, just a general overall flow today. But, of course, the main topic is going to be doing a game-by-game breakdown and also giving a Ravens record prediction. I teased it on the live stream. I gave a range of where I thought the Ravens would finish with the way the schedule played out, and we're going to give the official way too early prediction right now because, we're in the middle of May. Obviously, we're going to have more predictions, but this is the way too early right after the schedule gets released edition. So let's get into it. Let's talk about just the overall schedule first. I will read it out, and then we will talk about it. So, regular season, we know the Ravens play the Chiefs in week 1. We knew that on Monday. 8:20 Thursday night football. No secret. Then you get week 2. It's the Raiders at home. Week 3, Cowboys on the road, 4:25. Week 4, you get the Bills at home, 8:20 p.m. Eastern Time, Sunday Night Football. Week 5 is the Bengals, 1 p.m. Eastern Time away. Week 6, Commanders at home. Week 7, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Monday Night Football in Tampa Bay. It's an away game. Week 8, Cleveland Browns at 1 o'clock. Week 9, Denver Broncos. That's at home. The Browns game is away, by the way, in week 8. Then you get week 10 at home against the Bengals on Thursday Night Football. Week 11, away against the Steelers. Week 12, away against the Chargers on Monday Night Football. Week 13, Philadelphia at home, 4:25. The bye week in week 14. Then you get the Giants in week 15 away. The Steelers on Saturday afternoon football at home in week 16. The Texans are going to Houston for Christmas, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time in week 17. In Cleveland in week 18 at home. There's no date and there's no time for that one because those games usually get flexed based just off the playoff scenarios and seeding. So, as I talked about on the live stream, I think it's a decently healthy schedule for Baltimore. There definitely are some areas to look at. But as a general analysis and just looking at it from a whole perspective, I really don't hate it. Like, again, we'll talk about some of the things I don't like about it in the second part of the show. I'm going to get to pros and cons. But divisional matchups are pretty decently spread out for the most part. Remember, last year, the Ravens had those 3 AFC North away games, divisional away games. They were done with those by the time week 5 rolled around. And it just felt really weird, right? I mean, I think it benefited Baltimore in the long run. But that type of schedule, there are always nuances and interesting things that pop up here. And one of those things to me, and this is something I've made sure to make a point of multiple times, is the fact that it's super balanced. Like, this is a very balanced schedule, all things considered. When you're talking about sometimes teams get 3-game homestands, 4-game road trips, sometimes you're on the road for a while, you're at home for a while. That's not the case here for the Ravens. I'll read it out and did this on the last stream too, but you got at Chiefs versus Raiders, at Cowboys versus Bills, at Bengals versus Commanders, at Buccaneers, at Browns versus Broncos versus Bengals, at Steelers, at Chargers versus Eagles, at Giants versus Steelers, at Texans versus Browns. So for those who don't know what I'm getting at, away, home, away, home, away, home, away, away, home, home, away, away, home, away, home, away, home. You're going back and forth pretty much the entire season there. The Ravens automatically play one more road game because of the way the new NFL rules work and the scheduling rules that changed a couple years ago, where you play the same seed or the same place finisher in the NFC division you played 2 years ago. So for the Ravens, that is Tampa Bay, who won the NFC South last year. They played the NFC South 2 years ago. So that's why they play the Buccaneers this year. And then, of course, they play the entire NFC East. But you have a lot of interesting things with the primetime situation. And something I also made sure to highlight is the fact that Baltimore will be playing less games this season in the 1 p.m. slot than in the quote-unquote primetime slots. Now, primetime, by definition, obviously is the 8:15 games. Ravens have 5 of those this year. But in terms of the all eyes are on you slots, 9 games for Baltimore in either the 4 o'clock window or the 8 o'clock window. 9 of those. 8 of their games are in the 1 o'clock window. So you're playing less 1 p.m. games this season than you are in the 4 p.m. or 8:15, 8:20, 8:30, whatever. You're playing less games than 1 p.m. this year, which the Ravens are a 1 p.m. team. It's the East Coast thing. We've talked about that. But there are going to be a bunch of eyes on Baltimore. And I think the NFL, in terms of getting that right, I mean, yes, the Ravens 100% deserve to be in primetime. It's no doubt. Lamar Jackson is primetime television. The Ravens, the way their defense played last season. Look, they were the top seed in the AFC last year. They were the best team in the regular season by a pretty wide margin last season. Why would the NFL not want to get them in front of as many eyes as possible? That's what's going to bring in the money. Lamar Jackson, he's a guy that brings the eyes to the television sets. He's Houdini. I mean, Houdini brings eyes to the television sets. Lamar Jackson certainly does that. Plus, I think it really helped out that since the Ravens won the AFC North and finished in first place, they're getting that first place schedule. You got 10 playoff teams from last season on the docket here. And not that all those teams are going to make the playoffs again, but it's a big test for the Ravens. You have a couple of games in here where, yeah, you definitely should win them if you're Baltimore, but we do know the Ravens like to play up to competition and down to competition. So I say this every single season, the Ravens cannot underestimate any opponent. Teams like even one that's interesting this year is Buffalo. Buffalo is a team that lost a lot of veteran talent. They're playing Buffalo again, week 4 on Sunday Night Football. You say, oh, Stephon Diggs isn't there anymore. They lost their safety duo. Trey White did it. People are saying, oh, well, the Bills might not be the Bills this year. You can't have that mindset. Josh Allen is Josh Allen. They're still an extremely, extremely talented team. And that's you can't do it if you're the Ravens. They're not going to. They're not going to underestimate anybody, but we do know that sometimes they do play up and down to competition, and that's just the reality. And it's not just Baltimore. Every team does it. So I'm not just giving flack to Baltimore for something only Baltimore does. That's not what Baltimore does in terms of just them. Everybody does do it. Now, their primetime games, just to read them off, it's the Chiefs in week 1, the Bills in week 4, Buccaneers week 7, you got Bengals in week 10, and then Chargers on Monday Night Football in week 12. The 4:25 p.m. slots, it's Dallas week 3, then it's Philadelphia week 13, Steelers in week 16, and Texans in week 17. Eyes are going to be on the Ravens. It's exactly what it is. Now, another interesting thing, actually, I might save this for the second part of the show because it does go into pros and cons a little bit. So I'll save that one. It's about rest time and short weeks and all that type of stuff. But overall, it's a first place schedule, pretty well balanced out. Again, it's not like there are a couple of gauntlets though. Here's what I'll end the first segment with. I have 3 gauntlets for the Ravens this season. Beginning of the season gauntlet, middle of the season gauntlet, end of season gauntlet. For your first 5 games this upcoming season. It's big. Week 1 through week 5, you got Chiefs, Raiders, Cowboys, Bills, Bengals. 4 of those 5 games, again, Chiefs, Cowboys, Bills, Bengals. I'm not including the Raiders, even though, again, don't underestimate them, but they're not in that conversation at the moment for me. Starting 4 of your first 5 with Chiefs, Cowboys, Bills, Bengals is tough. Then you get the middle of the season, week 8 to 12. It's Browns, Broncos, Bengals, Steelers, Chargers, and then Eagles in week 13 if you want to throw Philadelphia in there as well. It's a big stretch, even if you want to throw Tampa from 7 to 13, right? I mean, it's going to be interesting because if you take Denver out of the equation, Buccaneers, Browns, Bengals, Steelers, Chargers, Eagles, that's a really tough middle of the season stretch. That's 3 divisional opponents. Going to be really important for the Ravens to really string out some wins there. Then after their bye week, you got the last part of it, which is Steelers, Texans, Browns, 2 divisional matchups at home, and the Texans. So Ravens have a lot of big games for them this season against really good opponents that if they lose to, that will have playoff implications. I mean, same thing if they win, obviously, but divisional games, AFC games, really important. If you lose a game, lose to the NFC teams. It's the best loss you can take, even though no loss is a great one. But coming up in the second part of the show, we'll be talking about some pros and cons of the Ravens schedule, starting to preview some of the game-by-game predictions and breakdowns, plus record previews coming up. Stay tuned. A lot to get to on the show. First, this show is brought to you by Gametime, and I've had plenty of frustrating ticket buying experiences in my life, especially for NFL games. Sometimes I wasn't sure if the seats were good. Sometimes I couldn't for last-minute tickets. Other times there were just no good deals at all. But with Curta last-minute deals, all in prices, views, and receipt, and the lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets. And obviously, with the schedule release, we now know who the Ravens are going to be playing. We knew who, but when they're going to be playing, and so the Chiefs game in week 1 is awesome. That Buffalo game, prime time at M&T Bank, those divisional matchups, all games I'd love to attend. But the Gametime app is great. They have plenty of amazing features, such as last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. But also the experience of the app is great as well, such as flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing, seat views, lowest price guarantee, Gametime ticket coverage, and more. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. So buy again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spelled LOCKEDONFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back for our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still hanging out with you here on Thursday. We officially know the Baltimore Ravens' full 2024 NFL schedule. Really exciting. Baltimore's in the spotlight. Said it all throughout that first segment. They're going to be having plenty of eyes on them. But let's get into some of the pros and cons of this schedule here. And I think there are a couple that we can look at. Start with the pros. Start with the positives, right? And then we'll move into the negatives. One thing that I like about the Ravens schedule, and I mentioned it in the first segment, is I think just how fluid it is. Away, home. You know, I'm not going to do it all again. But the fact that there are no long road trips, I think is great. The fact, home stretches are awesome, but I think 2-2 is fine. That's the most the Ravens get at home or on the road. That's consistent. I like the consistency. And I think that it gets the team in a routine, right? They understand that, they're not going to be on the road for a long time. I think that's a really good thing. Another thing I like about the Ravens schedule, honestly, is the fact that you look at it, Baltimore has a lot of different opponents they have to play, a lot of different teams they have to play. But last year, their schedule was so wacky because they had to go abroad, and then they had to play the NFC West. So they were going to Arizona, and obviously they had to go out to the West Coast multiple different times last season. They didn't have to go to Seattle, right? They didn't have to go to Los Angeles either to play the Rams. But to me, this whole thing is, you go to San Francisco, you got to travel all these miles, right? You're going and playing all these teams all the way out. Bunch of miles. And Michael Pierce talked about it. A bunch of Ravens players have, Qadri Ismail, he talked with us too about how travel can kind of mess up some stuff. Baltimore's not traveling very far this year. I think the game they have to go the farthest for is the Chargers in LA. I mean, other than that though, going to Tampa, obviously the divisional matchups, but Dallas and Kansas City, New York for the Giants, that's not very far considering what they did last season. I think that will help Baltimore in the long run. Now, I saw a stat, and I can't find it right now. I've been trying to find it. But Baltimore will have a bunch of rest days based off of how many primetime games they have. and just the rest outside of that. They're going to have short weeks for sure, but some of the rest, I mean, that's great and all, but I don't know. I guess I'm going to get into a con here right now is the Ravens at the end of this season. I mean, and Pittsburgh is going through the same thing. The AFC North got kind of, got kind of the short end of the stick here with some of the scheduling late in the season in December. So Baltimore has their bye week, right? They're going to play the Sunday game against Philadelphia. They'll be in their bye week. Then they'll have December 15th against the Giants. Then they're going to play on Saturday against the Steelers. So you get it's 1 day of a short week there. You lose 1 day. But then you play on Wednesday. So it's Sunday to Saturday, which is a short week, and then Saturday to Wednesday, which is another short week. And then you're going to have all the time until week 18. But even so, it's just like, man, that's a short turnaround, especially, you're playing the Steelers, which the fact that it's the Steelers in the middle, and I'm sure Steelers and, people in the Steelers feel the same way here about this and who cover the team. But the fact that it's Pittsburgh and how physical and how crazy those games get in the middle of Giants and Texans, like that's going to be, you got to go into that game a little beat up, both teams, playing the Giants and having that 1 day less to get ready for it and recover your body. Then you got to go into a Christmas game against the Texans, who I think are going to be really good this season. And then for Pittsburgh, they play the Chiefs on Christmas. So both teams, honestly, Baltimore and Pittsburgh kind of got, I'm still saying the short end of the stick there. You get another short week when you play the Bengals on Thursday. So you get the Broncos on Sunday at home and then the Bengals. So luckily they're not traveling. Luckily that's home and home. That's all right. But I guess the good thing is that week 1 isn't a short week. We've talked about that. The fact that, Thursday night games are short weeks, but since Thursday night and week 1 is the first game of the season, there's no short week. Also, the fact that the Ravens are going on the road on Christmas again, second straight year, that's just a cruel thing to do, honestly. I don't really like what the NFL did there. It's kind of, I don't know. It's not something I agree with. For the players, for the coaches, for everybody involved with the organization, even outside who cover the team and whatnot, who have to work their schedules around these games, going on the road for Christmas is tough, right? Two times in 2 seasons. That's pretty brutal. And you have 31 other teams you could put in that slot. You can move the Texans game to a different day, different week, still in prime time if you wanted it to be even. I get the allure of having great Christmas matchups. Like it brings the NFL their money. But in my opinion, it's not good for the players, both on or off the field, in my opinion, especially for Baltimore. I mean, even if it was at home, it would be even a different story. But the fact that Baltimore has to go on the road again for Christmas, I don't know. I feel for the organization and everybody involved, because that's just kind of, it's a little bit of a messed up thing to do. But regardless, show must go on, right? Money, I guess for the NFL, money has to come in. So that's what they're going to end up doing. Other than that, though, I mean, look, the Ravens, they earned this schedule, right? Everybody's saying, wow, they're playing so many tough teams. How'd they get this? I mean, look, they won the division. They finished in first place. Teams that finish in first place play good teams. But guess what? The Ravens are also a good team. So when we're starting to talk about, who's going to get the 1 seed and what are the benefits, what are the cons to it? Look, you want to go for the highest seed you can, right? You don't want to throw a division title so you get a quote-unquote easier schedule. And part of that is, look, teams who finish in first aren't necessarily primed to finish in first again, right? So the Ravens, this is a tough schedule. A lot of teams who they're going to have to take, I mean, you got to take everybody seriously, but a lot of teams you're going to have to get up for, and you got to get up for everybody. But in my opinion, an overall solid schedule with some flaws, with some definite flaws. We're going to see how it all plays out for them, though, here. And coming up, we're going to be getting into a game-by-game prediction for the Ravens schedule, what it looks like. We'll talk about wins, losses, and then, of course, my final way too early record prediction. Stay tuned. Plenty to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It's going to take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Denver Nuggets. I'm a big Denver Nuggets guy. If you're new to the show, if you've been here, you probably know that already. But Nuggets and Timberwolves facing off in Game 6 tonight. Really hoping Denver can put this thing away. Minnesota's a heck of a team, really tough team. I don't know. They probably lose this game and it goes 7, but we're going to see. If you want to bet Nikola Jokic props, Anthony Edwards props, you can do that over on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We are back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you talking Ravens football. Really appreciate everybody for being here today. And, of course, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. Be sure to subscribe to us, video form, audio form. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts and obviously in video form too on YouTube, 5 days per week plus more bonus content. So if you're an everyday, I really appreciate you rocking out with me every single day. If you're new to the channel, welcome in. Hopefully you're enjoying the content and stick around for a while. And if you're in the middle, welcome back to the show. Appreciate everybody for sticking with me through this. I wanted to get to the predictions earlier in the show, but there were just so many other things with the schedule coming out last night. Didn't get to cover it all. I wanted to cover all the bases before we got into the predictions here, so appreciate everybody for sticking with me who was still here. But let's talk about it. We'll go game by game. We'll talk about it. I'll give my assessment, and then at the end, obviously, we'll add them up, and I'll give my official record prediction. Week 1, Kansas City away. This is going to be an interesting one. It's going to be tough. I'm going to say Baltimore wins this game, and it's going to be close. I think it will be more of an offensive shootout than we saw the AFC Championship game. But I said, and look, I'm going to stick by what I was saying here. The Ravens do have some advantages over Kansas City here in terms of a couple of personnel things, but there are also some cons to the matchup as well. But to me, I think the fact that Baltimore and Kansas City will be fully healthy, of course, barring any preseason or training camp injuries. You're getting week 1, Ronnie Stanley. The week 1 Ravens have historically been really good. And part of that is probably because it's the healthiest they'll be all season. So I'm going to give the Ravens the win in that game. I'm also going to give the Ravens the win against the Raiders in week 2 at home. Again, Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew, those quarterbacks don't necessarily scare me. Minshew actually led the Colts to a win last year. So, maybe I shouldn't be speaking too soon on that. But again, I just think for the Raiders, they lost Josh Jacobs. Obviously, Devontae Adams is still there. They have improved their defense, and Antonio Pierce really helped them last year. But I don't know. I just think Baltimore is going to be too much for Las Vegas. I think Dallas, I'm going to say they lose to Dallas. I'm going to say they drop their first game to Dallas in week 3. Honestly, if we're talking about losses, that's the best loss you can take, right? NFC game, I think for the Ravens, it's not that they can't beat Dak. It's not that they can't, beat the Cowboys, but I think it's going to be close and hard fought. They're going on the road. I don't know. It feels like they can win that game, and I'm going to pencil them in for a loss. I think that they're still going to be getting used to some of their offensive linemen. Micah Parsons might wreak havoc there, get Lamar Jackson in some tough situations. So we're going to see, but I'm going to say that Baltimore loses that game. Week 4 against Buffalo, primetime. I think this is going to be a win. I think Baltimore wins this game. In my opinion, the Ravens, Bills are a tough team, but they've lost so much. I'm not discounting them. I'm not counting them out. But the fact that they don't have to worry about Stephon Diggs, they've brought in a couple of different players. But to me, I just think even though Josh Allen is Josh Allen, they still have some quality playmakers on defense. They lost so much. And so I'm going to say Baltimore wins that one. Week 5 against Cincinnati, I will say they win that game as well. I think the Bengals, the Ravens have matched up well with them. Now we're going to see. Mike McDonald was Joe Burrow's kryptonite and the Bengals' kryptonite. Will Zach Orr be the Bengals' kryptonite here? We're going to see. It's going to be interesting, but I'm going to say the Ravens win that one. Week 6 against the Commanders, I'm going to give Baltimore this one as well. So we're at 5-1 for the Ravens through 6 weeks. Commanders are a young team. Jaden Daniels, we know the Ravens defense usually feasts on rookie quarterbacks. So I'm going to say the Ravens win that one decently comfortably. Week 7 against the Buccaneers. I'm going to give them a loss here. I'm going to say they lose to the Buccaneers. I think Tampa's just underrated. I mean, we're going to see how Baker performs in year 2 in Tampa. Obviously got the extension with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. Their defense took a step back last season, but I do think that they'll take a bit of a step forward this year. I'm going to say they lose a close game to Tampa Bay. Then I'm going to say they lose to Cleveland in week 8. I'm going to say back-to-back losses week 7 and week 8, which, again, would not be the end of the world. I think Cleveland just sometimes – there's something about Cleveland where it just feels like they have Baltimore's number in some way, shape, or form. Deshaun Watson put on a crazy performance with the broken shoulder last time, and that's a team that took a game from, Indy last year. Baltimore lost that game, right? They blew it. Pittsburgh, Baltimore lost that game. They blew that one too. The Cleveland game, Cleveland took that game from Baltimore. So I'll say Cleveland wins and beats Baltimore. So we have Baltimore at 5-3 through 8 weeks, but I'll say they'll be 6-3 through 9. I'll give them a win against the Broncos here. I think for the Ravens, Denver, Bo Nick's going to be their guy. I think, again, Baltimore will beat up on rookie quarterbacks, and that'll be the same with Bo Nick. I'll give them the win against the Bengals in week 10 as well. I think Baltimore, again, I think it's just about the kryptonite factor, right? I feel like the Bengals offense has not been able to solve Baltimore's defense consistently yet. Joe Burrow, it's been really tough sledding against that defense. So I'm going to say Baltimore sweeps Cincinnati again this year. I'll give Baltimore the win at Heinz Field against Pittsburgh. Lamar Jackson, talk about kryptonite. Steelers defense has been Lamar's kryptonite over the course of his career if you want to talk about a specific team. But I'm going to say that the Ravens get that done it's not Heinz Field anymore. Excuse me. It's Acrisure. I still have the Heinz in my head, but it's Acrisure Stadium now. So give the Ravens the win at Pittsburgh. Then I'm going to say they beat Jim Harbaugh. John Harbaugh gets the win over his brother in the Har Bowl. So I'm going to say they win that game as well. Then I'll have them losing to the Eagles in week 13. Again, if you lose to an NFC team, that's fine. You take those. It's unfortunate, but I'd rather have an NFC loss than to an AFC opponent, or the worst type of loss you can take is to a division rival. Then we get to the Giants after their bye week in week 15. I'm going to say the Ravens win this game. I'm going to say Baltimore beats the Giants, regardless who the quarterback is. Daniel Jones, if he's still healthy at that point, I think Baltimore wins that game, and Lamar gets revenge for the NFC loss that he's taken the hands of the Giants. I'll say that it'll be a weird week going into week 16, and Baltimore loses that game to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's still a good team. They upgraded their quarterback play with Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. I mean, they just needed somebody not named Kenny Pickett or Mitch Trubisky, honestly. I mean, they just needed something. Russell Wilson's not the Russell Wilson of Seattle, but he's still an upgrade over what Pittsburgh had last year, and that's saying something. Their wide receiver group troubles me for them. I don't think it's a very good one outside of George Pickens, but I'm going to say Baltimore loses that one. I'm going to give Baltimore the win on Christmas against Houston, and then I'm going to give Baltimore the win in week 18 against Cleveland. So they split with Pittsburgh, split with Cleveland, and sweep Cincinnati in the division. So that ends up giving us, I had them losing to the Cowboys. I had them losing to the Buccaneers, the Browns, the Eagles, and the Steelers. That's 5 losses. I'll have them going 12-5 this year. So just one win less than what they had at 13-4 last season. I think that's fine. I think that's going to put them in the thick of the division race pretty handedly. I think all 4 of these teams are going to be competing for the AFC North crown this year. But again, this is a tough schedule. The Ravens aren't going to go 17-0. I mean, hopefully I jinxed it and they do. I would. You put me on freezing cold takes. If that happens, I'd be more than happy to have jinxed the Ravens going 17-0. I hope they do. But there are some really tough teams on this schedule. We don't know what the injury situations are going to look like with any of these teams either. So obviously that's why we're saying these are way too early predictions, because again, we have no idea what these teams are going to look like. Any other additions? We're in May still, right? What happened after the draft for Baltimore last offseason? They added a bunch of pieces. They plugged up the rest of their remaining holes. And, if I had done a prediction, I think I did do one actually right after the schedule, the prediction then looked different from what it was right before the season started. So it's just a way to, look in an early preview of the schedule. Obviously, we're going to have to revisit it as the offseason continues, but still kind of fun to go and think about all these different possibilities of how the Ravens could figure out some teams and end up having their record be at the end of the 2024 season. That's all I have here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Really appreciate everybody for tuning in to the show today. We're going to be right back here tomorrow talking more Ravens. We'll continue talking about the schedule and everything that goes along with it. So be sure to subscribe and follow along, video form, audio form, the whole 9 yards there. Really appreciate all the community we have, video, audio, social media, subtext. It's really been amazing growing this. We're actually almost at 7,000 subscribers on YouTube, so that's another milestone here. We're going to be hitting soon on Locked On Ravens. Appreciate everybody. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.